Yeah, no, I've had a very interesting relationship with cannabis and creativity, probably since I was like 16. I did a lot of research and reading afterwards to try to unpack what it did to my mind. And what I learned, actually, is that cannabis has a history of being used in improvisational arts and improvisational creativity. Jazz has an intertwined history with cannabis because it's an improvisational art form. Freestyle rap also is very, very, very tightly connected to cannabis. And I even did research on why this is the case. And it's because cannabis boosts associational thinking and increases lateral thinking. The naturally occurring endogenous version of cannabis is called anandamide, which is one of our neurotransmitters, and it means it's a Sanskrit word for internal contentment. But because cannabis boosts associational lateral thinking, it increases the range of associations that you create when you are riffing, when you're coming up with ideas. Lateral thinking essentially increases. So normally, when you prime, when you have associational thinking, like if I tell you bird, you think the immediate associations, the ripple effects are like wings and maybe flight, characteristics that you associate with bird. When you're the right amount of high on cannabis, you go into a kind of hyper-priming. So what happens is when you think about a bird, you're more elastic in your associations. You expand your associative net. And so you might think of birds, you might think of wings, and then you might think of like the ways in which we transcend our limitations. You just make a bigger leap in your associations, which that's essentially what poetry is, right? And so I think that's the reason why poetic rhapsody is associated with altered states of consciousness and why so many poets used to cultivate altered states in order to allow the creativity to emerge. It comes through you but not from you, and though it is with you, it belongs not to you. So our responsibility is not to script what's going to come out, but to set the stage, to cultivate the atmosphere. Just like a flame requires certain ingredients so that it can light up. And I think that cannabis, for me at least, the judicious and moderate use with intention in the right environment increases suggestibility and reactivity to signals from within and from without. So I could put myself in certain environments and I could induce certain reverie. I could reflect upon that reverie, and then there was this compulsion to transcribe and integrate, and that eventually led to this desire to record myself, which is a form of journaling. And that's really the genesis of what this became, these videos. And then when I read all these studies about freestyle rappers and jazz musicians doing fMRI scans on their brain and realizing that when they were in flow, the part of the brain responsible for self-editing and the inner critic was actually shut down, I realized, oh, wow, so maybe what it is that cannabis is facilitating for me flow. And then I spoke to Stephen Kotler, who knows all about the neuroscience of flow, and he's like, oh my God, yeah, that's called a hippie speedball. Yeah, a hippie speedball is the combination of 20 minutes of aerobic exercise, an espresso shot, and a joint. And I was like, isn't that fascinating? And so what's kind of cool now that cannabis is normalized in California and Canada and all these places is that we can actually talk about, oh yeah, this is cool. Just like people like, I like their double espresso to get some work done in the morning, like that you can really, especially in creative fields, for problem solving where out-of-the-box thinking is required, that this is a pretty useful tool. And certainly it has been for me. But I'm not a proselytizer, I'm just honest.